Writing a good story is hard. Making a good movie is hard. Transforming one into the other is even harder. Welcome to Adaptive Difficulty. This is a show where a couple of book lovers take on the challenge of adaptations. I'm Cameron, and with my friend Josh, we explore the difficult and sometimes bizarre choices that happen in the course of making an adaptation. This week, we are exploring the 2010 filmed play Macbeth with Patrick Stewart, based on Shakespeare's work of the same name. Join us as we explore this adaptation.
Hello, I am Josh.
And I'm Cameron. Ooh.
Okay.
How was your experience with Macbeth?
Are we starting on Macbeth the play, or are we jumping right into just the
I figured
the
we start
version?
off with Macbeth the play.
Okay. Did you have any prior experience with Macbeth?
Yes, I taught it to some sophomores last year.
Okay. I had been required to read it for school twice. I had actually read it once before this, and then I read it again this time. Obviously, I don't particularly remember anything about how I felt about it those times. But this time I enjoyed it. I read it, kind of scene by scene in the course of a day.
You mean you didn't act it out?
Sorry.
You didn't act it out?
I did not.
Amateur.
I didn't have enough extras, so.
It's called a one-man show.
I guess what I took away from it this time, and not that this is like the most important facet of it, but is just how it is like relentlessly paced. Like, you think of Shakespeare as being fairly, obviously, if you've read him enough, he's not stodgy, but that's the reputation since it's classic literature. And also his other plays are not as fast paced, but this one, like, once it starts having the murders, like, they just keep piling up very quickly. That was kind of the main thing I was noticing as I read it this time.
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of very short scenes, whereas I feel like in other Shakespeare plays, and maybe I'm just misremembering them, but I felt they had longer scenes and fewer of them. But I felt like there was just scene transition every so often.
Yeah, and I actually kind of looked it up because I was noticing this as I read it. Apparently, obviously no one knows for sure, but modern assumption or consensus is that this was written for James the First, the king, and he only had 2 or 3 months to get it together. So it's kind of Shakespeare's all-nighter, is what I saw someone say, which is why there's it's the shortest of the tragedies. There's no subplots, and probably part of why it's paced so quickly is how quickly he had to bring it together.
I mean, I can't imagine making this in, an entire year. Like, I feel like just how well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good enough to be made for a lot longer, but those were the other Shakespeare plays. So
I've not read a lot of his other tragedies. Whenever I was in school, we always had to read the comedies, or I always got stuck in the comedy classes.
Yeah, we took the comedy class in college together, right? You were also in that?
Yes, Shakespeare and the Comedy of Love.
Okay.
We read...
Yeah, but then I also separately took just a generic Shakespeare course that happened to focus on the latter half of his life, which Macbeth was included in that. So I had read it then.
Yeah, I did the other generic Shakespeare class that was about his first half of his life when he did comedies. So I got like double doses of comedies.
Well, he did comedies in the second half. They were problem plays, is what people call them, because they don't know how to classify them, but they're mostly funny. Anyway, that's getting off the point.
But no, this is like one of, I think, like 3 tragedies that I've read by him. So it ranks high up there in terms of tragedies that I've read, and also high up there in terms of Shakespeare plays that I've read.
What are the other 2?
I read Romeo and Juliet in high school. I preferred Romeo and
Okay.
Juliet.
Me too.
Um,
I did not mean to say me too. I prefer Romeo and Juliet.
what's wrong with Romeo and Juliet? Now
I meant to say I also read it in high school.
there's an adaptation to watch. And then I also read, what is it? It's the Tempest.
Oh, okay. The Tempest is one of the problem plays because no one like dies really at the end, but it's not laugh out loud funny for the most part.
Well, pardon my misclassification of Shakespeare.
I like Macbeth a lot. I think I like King Lear and Hamlet more, which I think also happen to be the only other two Shakespeare tragedies I've read. I feel like I saw Julius Caesar at one point, but I didn't really retain any of it.
Well, that's a history play.
Maybe it was because it. So, yeah.
One of the things,
So
another reason why you can't classify them because it's a history play, but it's also a tragedy. But
but yeah, I mean, that again, my main takeaway was how fast it is. I was thinking as I read it, like, obviously no one would ever, well, not no one, but a straightforward adaptation that uses the language would never do it this way. But you could almost cast Macbeth as like a slasher movie if you wanted to. Like I was just thinking in my head, if you wanted to do a really inventive version of the character, that would be kind of neat.
yeah, I mean, the adaptation that we watched, and we can talk about that later, does have like a lot of horror elements already inside of it. So
That's true. Did you have like a main thought or takeaway from reading the play before we watched it?
I mean, to me, like this play boils down, for me at least, to like the dynamic between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. Like that to me is the most interesting aspect of the play. Is kind of how they interact with each other and how they both kind of like help each other along as they're doing the worst possible thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think that's one of those things that like the entire play rests on where you feel sympathy with Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, and where you kind of associate, one more with the other. Because as I was teaching it last semester, there was, a big debate as to whether or not it's Lady Macbeth's fault or Macbeth's fault that all this stuff happens.
Yeah, and I feel like I have one opinion on that when I read it and a different opinion almost when I saw it acted out, and different, I guess, emphasis was given to different parts, obviously, in the course of that. I mean, the obvious answer, but also kind of the thought terminating answer is that obviously it's both of them, but that's not interesting to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of it, you have, like, Macbeth is almost always just about to stop doing it, and then Lady Macbeth just kind of eggs him on just a little bit by calling him a woman, basically.
Yeah, and that, I feel like that's what got emphasized the most the first time I read it, so it's almost, I'm like stuck having that understanding of it, I guess, since that's how it was when I read it the first time, is like the amount of like literally pregnant imagery and the amount of wombs and milk and bosoms that show up in this are just like inescapable.
Well, there's not to speak about another adaptation, but there's another adaptation where or there's several adaptations where it's like implied that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth just lost a child and that they're kind of doing this to kind of fulfill their like void they have in their life at this point. So
yeah, and I don't think it's inappropriate to bring up other adaptations, but I almost feel like it's less about having a child, and the way I'm reading it is more about just wombs as a meaning of woman and what is innate, I guess, in womanhood and manhood, which obviously the answer to that 400 years ago is a lot different than our answer would be now, but it's still,
I mean,
complex in the play. And like that seems like what it's addressing the most to me is like his ambition feels like it's spurred on by a woman, but then it also in the language is giving us all these, like, all the masculine terms are the ones used for the ambition.
Well, I mean,
Like, I almost can't work out what stance it has on it.
I mean, Lady Macbeth begins the play like you first see her kind of reading the letter and deciding, okay, I have to help my husband because he's too much of a wuss to do this on his own. So I'm going to ask all these nice evil spirits, or the spirits of the world, not necessarily evil, to make me into a man, to get rid of everything that makes me feminine and just stop it up with man stuff instead.
Right. But she doesn't literally become a man. So you have to also consider that aspect. Like, even if she says that, if she remains a woman throughout the runtime of the play and does all these things, then what do you have?
Yeah. And then there's the witches who are mistaken for men because they're bearded. I felt that when I was reading this the second time, because I kind of also, the first time I read it, I kind of also had the kind of gender aspect in my mind. I had a bigger kind of, investigation into like what it means to be loyal and who you're supposed to be loyal to or what you're supposed to be loyal to. Because, it's all about, okay, he's wrestling with this because he's supposed to be loyal to his king, and that means doing certain things like hosting him and not killing him. But he also has to be loyal to his own ambitions. And you have Lady Macbeth, who has to be loyal to her husband, but also kind of loyal to his own ambitions as well. So she's kind of torn between being the faithful wife that's supposed to, in this time period, kind of follow what her husband says, and also kind of like trying to egg him on because she's trying to be loyal to like his ideal version of himself.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to respond to that with, but I get what you're saying.
I noticed it more this time, and especially as I was watching the adaptation, because that adaptation, I feel it puts kind of loyalty at its forefront with kind of how everything is set up and portrayed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like we're getting to the point where we're both dancing around relating it to the adaptation directly. So let's go ahead and dive into the adaptation itself, if that works for you.
Just to start off with, the whole, it kind of feels like a horror movie, that opening shot with like the bloody hand and it's kind of scary music and everything. So, and there's parts throughout this entire play where it like jumps from being like this character drama to being like a horror film.
Yeah, that's true. In the opening, you said bloody hand, right?
Yeah, it's in a bloody hand.
But in the first scene with the witches, well, not the first scene, they reach into and I can't remember the names of anyone except like the three main characters, but they reach into the guy who dies and pull out his like heart, and just, there's like a realistic heart prop that they're holding aloft. So that would be the most outwardly horrific part of the opening to me.
I guess that's true for me as well, but it felt, I don't know, almost a little tame in comparison to kind of the vibes that were happening in the first scene. And I don't know if that's because
there's a sense where it's almost like so outwardly image-based and symbolic that you kind of just are taking it as, this is a choice being made in an adaptation of Macbeth, and it's not registering as a real horror, I guess. So
yeah, that's kind of where I was at, where it was like, it almost, I think, went too far, where I was like, okay, here's the symbolism that the teacher points to in class, being like, what's the heart mean?
Right. And then the other thing with the sisters early on is they like commit medical homicide, right? They like give the guy some sort of injection and kill him.
I mean, I think the implication in the story is that he's fine, but like in the adaptation, yeah, they definitely do murder him. He's very much like Angel of Death-esque.
So, I mean, what do we think that means for the witch characters, or what was the purpose of adding that detail?
Well, I think it kind of almost goes to show that they're going to have a lot more of an active role in this story, because like in the play version, they are there, but they're like almost kind of removed from like every other scene that they're not in. Whereas in this one, like they're in the backgrounds of certain shots. They're kind of serving dinner to Macbeth and everyone else. So like they feel like a much more active like role in the story. And I feel like this is kind of setting that up.
Or what I thought was interesting about that is it makes the witches more active. And I don't know what version of the play you read, but there's like mine included and had notes about a section or a couple sections that are agreed to, or at least scholarly consensus is that they weren't written by Shakespeare, but traditionally they were performed as part of Macbeth, so they put it in copies of Macbeth. Did yours have those?
The witch scenes, I did not see that.
It's not every witch scene. The like second time the witches show up is the first time it says like this is not original. So like right after the banquet scene. And you can kind of tell because as I was reading, I was like, the play suddenly turned into like Dr. Seuss, because the rhymes become like a lot more obvious, which might be confirmation bias on my part because I had read the note saying it wasn't Shakespeare, but I'm not sure that it is. Anyway,
I mean, on some level, I can kind of see that, but on the other hand, I like that. I like the witches in this kind of where they.
Well, I didn't mind them when I was reading them. Anyway, the whole tangent was just to say they did not include those parts in the movie. Like they apparently, like specifically the two parts of the witches that my copy said weren't Shakespeare don't show up in the movie, and that's like the only major cut I noticed that the movie made. So I thought it was interesting that even though they have a higher role in the movie, they still don't have the part that would have made them more prominent because it wasn't Shakespeare.
Yeah, that gets rid of Hecate, right? The goddess who's in charge of the witches. It's that scene.
Yeah, Macbeth has a single line that mentions Hecate, is how he says it, and that I guess is still Shakespearean. I don't want to bother to double check right now. But other than that, they completely get rid of her. Yeah.
Good, because I didn't like that scene. But like pretty much all the other witches scenes are good. I just like the witches because they had like the most fun out of anyone in this play.
Yeah, the Hecate scene is not original, and then the third time and last time in the play that they show up, like half of it's not original and half of it is. So it's a little more confusing. But they cut out the part that was not original.
I'm mad that they cut out the "what you egg" phrase, because that's the one I was looking forward to.
Oh, I didn't even notice. Wow. I don't remember reading it, and I don't remember it being cut.
We can talk about that later, because it's not really about the witches.
Yeah, we're on the witches already, so any other, regardless of when it happens in the movie, any other thoughts on them?
Oh, what do you think of them being nurses?
I guess I was more focused on the fact that they were nuns. That seemed more prominent, but
well, they're like
other
nurse nuns.
They're nurse nuns, yeah.
I just kind of saw the nurse thing being like and this kind of ties into them being nurses / doctors. Because I guess it's not like ever stated anywhere that they're actually nurses. I mean, they dress like nurses, but it's, they just have the power over life and death, which is kind of their whole point in the play, is that, they seem to confirm that Macbeth's going to live, and then they kind of pull the rug out from under him, and they constantly kind of messing with the bounds of life and death.
I think I get that now that you say it. Which also makes me think the nun imagery really directly connects them to Christianity, obviously, but that would have been the opposite in the play, like seeking out these witches and following their advice would have been like directly in violation of probably, what we would assume Macbeth's actual religion to be, Catholicism, in the original play. So it's interesting to make them a direct representative of it in the adaptation.
Yeah, but you also have like, it's not just their direct representations. They're like this weird, like perverted version of it where they like murder people and they mess with bodies. So even though they are on the surface level, this kind of pristine kind of godly job, profession. They're actually kind of demented on the inside, which is
true. But I mean, is that too easy of an escape to like, oh, they're not really Catholics because they're evil and perverted? Like, I mean, sometimes Catholics are, just like everyone.
yeah, but is I don't know if it's the costume designer or the director decided much more beyond that.
They're obviously, I think, meant to evoke common sexual fantasies. Does that does you agree with that?
I mean, as someone who's not attracted to nurses in any way, I guess I see it. I mean,
you don't have to be straight to be like, there's a lot of sexy nurses and sexy nuns in society.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know. I just felt like if they were, I feel like it wasn't as overplayed as I thought it might be going into this, because I had only ever seen like promo material or like bits and pieces of it, and like, I feel like I never really kind of got more intense than the bare minimum of like, oh yeah, it's clearly referencing this commonly held sexy thing, but it doesn't go beyond that to like try to actually make it sexy.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, in like the third, well, not the third, it's only the second scene in this version of them showing up and speaking, when Macbeth is getting the prophecies from them about how he's invulnerable. The like bodies are coming alive in the suits, and there's like very half-second shots of the witches like on top of them in obviously sex positions, and that was kind of the only direct reference to that.
Yeah, I don't know. That scene kind of irks me because I've seen other productions where they actually hold true to like what is actually happening in the play. Like, it's like a severed head is one of them, and I don't know. It felt kind of boring to watch.
Yeah, I thought the bodies resurrecting was interesting enough on its own, but all the extra stuff, the montage element on top of it that I was talking about, I guess I could take or leave.
And whenever there was the line of like Banquo's children being kings or whatever, all I could think about was, in The Last Jedi, when she goes into that evil dark side of the Force kind of hole, and she like sees herself kind of going backwards in like a mirror kind of thing. That's all I could think about.
Well, it's not Macbeth's fault that The Last Jedi used an image, because the Macbeth, the play, pretty much directly lists that image. It mentions like one of them has a glass and he sees infinite copies of the lineage.
Yeah, I know. I'm not blaming Macbeth, and I'm not blaming this adaptation. I'm just blaming Star Wars for ruining it for me.
Well, we all know that The Last Jedi is to blame for all societal ills of the past 8 years.
I was focused on how they were going to do Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And it seemed to me that, and this is kind of different than how I read it, is that Macbeth is much more of an asshole earlier on than in whenever I read it. Like, he feels like there's that scene where King Duncan is thanking Banquo, and when I read it in the play, it's just not like, it doesn't really strike me that Macbeth is upset about this, but in the movie, he's like clearly like annoyed that someone else is getting like credit or having attention showered on him. So I thought it was interesting that they decided to make it so much more that Macbeth is kind of lusting after power and kind of credit.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I almost was thinking to myself, like, I guess when I read it in the play, it just kind of felt like, well, the play has to explain how this guy becomes king so that the plot makes sense, because then Macbeth has to kill that guy, because that guy's going to be king now. And in the adaptation, the movie version, I almost feel like it felt to me like I suddenly registered it as, oh, that's why the scene is in the play, because it not just that sets up who each character is, but Macbeth is witnessing it and actively motivated by it. So I guess my takeaway was almost that it was showing me how the play was written. Like, it almost wasn't interpreting it, it just kind of understood something I didn't get in the first place.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing with like doing plays and adaptations of plays is that they aren't like super descriptive as to what's happening all the time, and it kind of leaves itself open to directorial intent. So,
Backing up a little and going back to the nuns, I guess. They make like after they take the heart and everything, like the very next scene they're in, they have like a dummy made of a blood bag and that heart, right?
have absolutely no idea what to make of that. Like, I sat there
Yeah, that
trying to figure out if it's
what?
if it's supposed to be like this is their like influence on the world, because like it both is and isn't acknowledged by like the characters in the play, like because there's parts where they like go up and look at it and they seem kind of perturbed by it, but never so much so that they like talk about it. And I know they can't talk about it because it's not talked about in the play, but like the fact that they don't react to it strikes me as very weird.
Yeah, it was like I didn't know if it was like the equivalent of a voodoo doll for them, or if it was like it is giving them the power to keep appearing and being active in the play, or
I
what, other than kind of a spooky visual.
Well, A, to the spooky visual, because it's always good to have spooky visuals. But I also kind of like your first point where like it's like a voodoo doll, like they've like captured Macbeth's heart and they're gonna like use it. Well, you know, a stand-in for Macbeth's heart, and they're gonna use it to kind of have a puppet. So I guess if I was forced to make a decision on to why they did that, that would be it. But again, it just strikes me as very weird.
I have a note here that the first time Macbeth brings up the word murder, like you can tell it's the first time he's contemplating it in the script and in the movie. I thought Patrick Stewart's acting as Macbeth, that was the first moment in the movie where I was like, wow, he's like really doing a great job.
I have to just thank that fact that it's Patrick Stewart and not some other person. I don't mean like a specific person.
But you could see, I guess you could see like the trepidation in his face and like it morphing through all these different emotions of like admitting to himself that his plan is to commit murder. So I thought that was just really good.
Well, it's like the kind of like realization of like you see like the mirage in the desert. It's like the very good thing that you want. And as you get closer and closer to it, you realize it's fake. It's like that where he sees what he wants, which is the crown of Scotland, and he can imagine himself getting closer and closer to it until he realizes that he has to murder somebody to get to it.
Right.
And then it all disappears. So I don't know if you noticed this, but when Lady Macbeth is like in the elevator and reading the letter, she's like very out of focus. And she like stays out of focus, like I guess it's not focused on her at all until she decides she's gonna start acting to do things for Macbeth. So as she's like listening to what he wants to do, she's out of focus, but then she almost like forces the camera to pay attention to her by deciding, you know what, I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna help Macbeth. I'm going to decide, I'm gonna help him along the way to make sure he does what he wants to do. And I just thought it was very interesting that they decided to use the focusing of the camera to kind of highlight that.
It does kind of break up a point I was wanting to mention, is that this is a movie. It's not a filmed stage play, but it's directly adapted from one, and it is very stagey. It's a lot of like mostly empty rooms, and they film the people acting in them, which is fine. But that is really interesting to bring up because it relies specifically on movie as a visual form. Like you couldn't do that on stage, so it's interesting to see them implementing something like that, which would definitely not have appeared on stage.
Well, I almost think that like like if Shakespeare were a director, he would do it that way, um, because it just seems so obvious. Because like she starts off by reading about someone else's adventures, and then she's like, "No, what? This is my story too." So you kind of have her like force the camera onto her. So
Something else I noticed, I guess, in that scene, and this is kind of the complement to my other point about Patrick Stewart's acting, is that when she says "unsex me here," like you were talking about earlier, she asks, turn me into a man for all of this action that I'll need to take part in. She like is physically taken over by it. Like you can see it happen to her as she says it. And I thought that was really great acting on that actress part. I think her name is Kate Fleetwood, if I'm not mistaken.
yes, I believe that's correct. I think they got two really strong actors for like the two most important parts of the play. So good on them. Not that they wouldn't.
Yeah, it's a miracle. How could they think to do that? Yeah. And going back to the elevator like appearance of her not being in focus, this became a little less true as the movie went on because the elevator gets used a lot. But at the time, I hadn't seen as much of the movie. The only characters that had really used it were the witches leaving. So Lady Macbeth showing up on the elevator, it was almost like, is this a witch reappearing into the plot? Like, it felt like maybe there was some deliberate ambiguity there about Lady Macbeth.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the elevator was more of like, I felt like you see, whenever they're about to do something bad, like oftentimes the next elevator scene is them like descending. So like they're descending into madness or they're descending into depravity or whatever. And the play ends with them descending into darkness, which I kind of interpreted them as going to hell at the end.
Yeah, I had a note exactly like that. Like, is this hell? Is it implying this setting has been hell the whole time, or are they just now going?
And I think there's like a couple of shots of the elevator going up. The most notable one is after, I think it's as Macduff is coming to try and kill Macbeth, that the elevator starts rising upward because it's like setting things right in the world. So they're rising up in the elevator again. So I got a lot of use out of that elevator.
One thing, they set a lot of the play in the kitchen of whatever like compound they're in. And there's one particular scene where they're just like, it's very gross if you pay attention to the food because it's like pigs' heads, cutting off fish heads,
and
taking the feathers out of chickens.
And the witches are there too.
Yeah, they're the ones doing most of this. But I thought it was interesting because I found it gross and I kind of connected it to all these themes of the state of nature being disrupted. Like there's lines specifically later on that are like, the sparrow is eating the hawk and the prey is going after the lion. Like everything's been turned topsy-turvy. But when you stop and think about it, everything they're doing in the kitchen is what's done to perfectly normal food every day. You just don't see that process.
Yeah, it's like an unveiling of the curtain. I don't know. I thought that specific scene was more there to kind of juxtapose against the scenes of all the war that's happening, where you kind of have this like butchering of human life, especially if you associate it with World War One, where there's a whole lot of trench warfare, where they're all just kind of stuck in like a meat grinder to like fight over inches and inches of land. And so you kind of just are kind of forced to kind of connect the two kind of aspects of like butchery.
Yeah, that's a good point. What I had written down for it was that it like, and going with my kind of unveiling the curtain idea was, it's the same thing. The way the play shows us this story of power and greed, and we're supposed to be moved or shocked by it. And it's kind of saying, this is how power works. Like, this is the reality of it. Anytime you get to this level of power. But I mean, I think your point has a lot of merit too.
I almost feel like I disagree with that because on both ends of the story, we have what is ostensibly a like benevolent king who like has nothing wrong with him whatsoever.
That's true. It's definitely true the way it's written, but I don't know if it's true the way the movie version plays out. Because even if there's this supposedly perfect king in the story, we're still stuck in this like so gray that the movie almost feels black and white compound in this nondescript, depressing country, even before Macbeth takes over.
Well, I will say that, and I noticed this the first time I read it, when I read it with my students last year, was that there's kind of a cyclical nature to it, where like the beginning of the play is the hero of the king, the champion of the king, Macbeth, killing a treasonous other person who was the Thane of Cawdor, and it ends with the champion of the king killing a treasonous person, also the Thane of Cawdor. And so it almost feels like we've circled back to where we are, and we're kind of stuck in this like eternal loop.
Yeah. And I mean, Macduff now, or Malcolm, is the one who becomes king, right?
Well, yeah, and it's like Malcolm's king. Macduff's name is very similar to Macbeth. The witches are still out there. They just want to cause chaos. So, I mean, it has all the markings of like this could directly start happening again.
Right. And Macduff has no kids or woman at all, so what will he do? So,
yeah. Well, one might think that without Lady Macbeth there, Macbeth would never have done it. So maybe Macduff's in the clear now.
right. Exactly. Like, maybe if we could get Macduff's sequel story, that would be the answer to all the questions of who is who and what caused what, and did gender have anything to do with it? But we don't have that, so. And it may also be going back to the idea that this was written to kind of flatter James the First, because it's kind of like, oh, this horrible usurper of the Scottish throne, it should be you. Don't worry, you'll never be violently assassinated.
Yeah, that's
but it might be a wink. What?
I was just gonna agree with you, because like that's kind of something that's always interested me about this play, since I like kind of learned that aspect of it, where it's like it's written for this king, where it's about someone overthrowing a king. So like I always found that part like interesting. I've just never really done anything with it.
All I was gonna say is maybe kind of leaving Macduff's story in this sort of limbo state where it's very easy to imagine him also becoming Macbeth is a wink to the non-king audience. Because he wants James the First to feel secure and flattered.
Well,
but maybe that's not really how the author feels.
This is literally after the gunpowder plot, right? Like this happens like 3 years after the gunpowder plot, like the play is written.
Yeah, it's pretty directly after.
So I guess it's like you're safe for now, but you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
But I think we were talking about the kitchen, and I kind of noticed, like, they use the kitchen a lot. I really kind of noticed that it was always the place where they, like, planned the murders. And I guess this probably ties into, like, my butchery comment from earlier, but, like, whenever they're kind of unsure about what to do, they go to the kitchen, or they're in the kitchen, and they start planning out the murders.
And it's a very clinical setting to do that in, so it does connect it back to butchery, like you're saying.
Well, I think whenever we first see Lady Macbeth, after she comes out of the elevator and after she kind of decides, I'm going to help my husband, the next thing we kind of see her is she's cleaning the walls, which almost feels like any time that like there's a murder that happens in like a house or whatever, in like a movie or TV show, like almost always the next thing is like them kind of scrubbing it off, all the blood off their floor, and she's cleaning the walls. So I almost feel like it feels almost kind of like it's kind of nodding towards that.
But is Macbeth the original have to clean the blood after the murder story?
I mean,
did the horror stories all steal it?
It's the earliest thing that I can think of them washing the blood off their hands to avoid blame. I have to imagine that the reason it's probably in this story is because that just is what makes the most sense just in real life.
Yeah. I'm going to leap ahead since you're talking about using the kitchen for everything. I have a classic, I paid too much attention to the food while I was watching Observation. So I don't know if you noticed this or not. Uh, Macbeth makes a sandwich in the kitchen at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and then he cuts it in two rectangles, and then he cuts one of the rectangles in two again, and he gives the little squares, each one to like one of his subordinate murderers, and then eats the half that's left over.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was interesting to see that. I mean, obviously it makes sense, but it was kind of funny to see like he gets a full half a sandwich and his
Well,
murderers get 1/4 each.
I think it's just kind of reinforcing the kind of power dynamic between them, where he both
Yeah, of course.
has complete control over like the food, but he gets to decide who gets what and how much they get. So it's kind of like, I'm the king. You kind of have to trust me and do what I tell you to do, or else, you're not going to get much food because I control the food.
Yeah, of course that's what it is. It was funny to me to even notice that it was being done at all.
The real crime is that he did not cut it into diagonals. He should have cut along the diagonals.
Well, I remember watching the scene and I was like intently focused on this sandwich. And he starts to cut it, and then it cuts to a shot of just his waist and above, so you can't see the sandwich. And I was like on tenterhooks about what shape he was cutting it into.
What if you just like cut it into like a heart or whatever? And he's like, this is how I always eat my meals.
That would be his most disgusting and vile act.
What? I mean, you don't like who eats the crust anyway of a sandwich?
You don't eat crust.
I don't really eat sandwiches all that often.
That was the only correct answer. Other than, yes, I eat the crust.
I mean,
It
like,
didn't seem like you were going there.
little children don't eat the crust, and you could make the argument that Macbeth is acting like a child in this whole play.
But he eats the crust, so he's not.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That means we can charge him as an adult.
Next thing I noticed, just going in order of my notes here, the false dagger scene where Macbeth is seeing the sword hanging in front of him. The only note I had specific to the adaptation on that is that he delivers it by staring at the camera.
That's also what I had.
Which I almost took as like, is it doing that classic thing of like trying to do some implicating of the audience? Like, you're the one watching this sensational murder-ridden story and keeping it going, or something like that. Kind of like a video gamey thing almost.
Well, like The Ring or any kind of other kind of, this is a haunted video thing that you have to show to other people so you survive or whatever, but it's like propagating the violence.
Yeah.
This is
I guess the first thing I thought of was like, and people complain about it a lot, like video games like The Last of Us, where it's like, killing is bad. Why did you do all that killing? But the entire game is killing people all the time.
Well, yeah, it's like the dissonance between you as an actor in the video game aspect and you as like a moral person, where I guess in this one it's like you as a viewer versus you as a moral person.
Right. And it also gets a little more absurd, and maybe they understood this when they were filming it and there's something to it, to do that bit with Macbeth, which has been a story for 500 years already and probably performed countless times the year that this movie was made. I mean, maybe that makes it more meaningful to say you're watching this and causing this, upsetting story of violence. But
I mean, like, in all fairness to that kind of viewpoint, like, this is how we talk about this play. Like, we always introduce this play as, oh, this is the play with a bunch of murders. The murderous king. Yeah, but I had, it's entirely focused on, like, him. There's another part later on, kind of, that I'll talk about later, where they're also kind of focusing on him, that I was upset they didn't do a thing. But the only other thing
last thing I wanted to say about that is this is another moment, now that I think about it, where I don't think it would have worked, at least not as well, if at all, when they did it on stage, because people deliver soliloquies by looking vaguely at the audience all the time, and you don't generally take it as directed towards you or implicating the audience. So I think that's another thing where the ability to stare directly at the camera rather than like fix your eye line some vague other place
Yeah.
is a choice they had to make in the movie.
And I will say, the way I watched this film is I was laying on my bed and I had it like right up, I had my computer right up next to me, so like I was very close to Patrick Stewart's face.
He was saying it to you.
Yeah, I am the person he was upset with.
14 years from now,
I will say,
Cameron will watch.
I don't know if you noticed this, and like this is definitely not intentional, but like when he's like talking about like the gouts of blood that's on the dagger, and he like goes to like wipe it off or kind of test it, he like uses his middle finger, and so like it looks like he's flipping off the camera.
I did not notice that at all.
Like it's almost certainly unintentional, but I just like it's like if we're not adding it on to what you said earlier, where it's like, oh, aren't you like a bad person for liking the murders? And it's like he's also flipping you off at the same time. He's like, fuck you for making me do this again and again and again. Although now that I think about it, if I'm tying that,
if you think about it, we're all Lady Macbeth.
I mean, that is true on a level, but like, you know, making them do it over and over and over again. We have the cyclical nature of the play. Violence is generational. Revenge is generational. It's all there. My my doctoral thesis is already written. There you go.
Next thing is that the scene directly after the first murder, where Macbeth comes out and is like feeling guilty, I guess. I just wrote down that was what
I was gonna say. He's in his bathrobe.
Yeah, but that was just another moment where I marked it down as like especially great performance, especially like where he's talking about like, I tried to say amen, but I couldn't, and why couldn't I bring amen to my lips, or whatever the line is.
Yeah, that's the one that like. That's like the one scene that I was like, I'm very glad to have, you know, not just read this, but I've also seen an adaptation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of my overall opinion on this boils down to Patrick Stewart's a really good actor, so I'm glad I watched him do it.
We should find a high school production of Macbeth and watch that instead and see if it still holds up.
Maybe someday.
But yeah, I like that scene after the murders, because I felt like with how empty everything was and how there's just like a sink in the middle of the hallway, it adds this like otherworldly quality to it, where like it almost feels like we're not in the real world, and I feel like that helps transport me more into kind of being a person who's like actually observing these events.
It didn't bother me that there was just a sink in the middle of nowhere, but I definitely didn't initially take it that way. I guess I was like, oh, this was a stage play, this is super stagey, so there probably was just a sink prop and two actors in the original. But I do like your thinking on it, but it was not how I was seeing it as I watched it.
Yeah, but I don't know, it felt like a good like thing that almost doesn't quite make sense, where like you can't quite tell if you're awake, you can't tell if you're asleep, but you're like, this dream doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I like that.
And then her coming back covered in more blood than him is interesting, because whenever I read the play, I don't really picture her as coming back covered in blood. I know there's that line where she says, my hand is as red as yours. I always took her as talking metaphorically, where she's like, I'm now part of this just as much as you are. I never really pictured her as like being covered in blood.
I guess I didn't picture them being covered in different amounts of blood, but I definitely took my hand is as red as at least partially literal. But I think it's interesting because it gives you, at least in the movie, they're giving you this sense of Macbeth as more clinical in enacting it, and Lady Macbeth as more impulsive and driven in enacting it.
Yeah, because like, I just don't understand how she gets that much blood on her. She's not murdering anyone. She's just wiping the daggers on their faces or whatever. So I don't understand how she ends up having more blood on her.
Doesn't she? No, Macbeth kills them later when the body's discovered.
Yeah. Right. Yes. So they're still asleep.
You have a point.
So she's just kind of like wiping blood on them. I just don't know how she gets so much blood on her. Like, it almost felt like to me it was making like a conscious choice to kind of show the audience that Macbeth is guilty or whatever, but like Lady Macbeth is really guilty because like look how much blood's on her versus look how much blood's on him.
Yeah, I think that probably is what it was going for. And I don't know how I feel about that on a personal level immediately. I do think in general, in those scenes leading up to the murder and the murder, I was a lot more convinced that in the movie version that Macbeth like would not have done it without Lady Macbeth there. Whereas in the reading the play, I'm kind of neutral on that.
Yeah. I think when I'm reading the play, it feels much more like the reason he doesn't want to do it feels much less like natural, feels much more like artificial and clinical, where he's like, I've weighed the pros and cons and I had decided not to go forward with this. Whereas in the directed version, I felt much more like there was an emotional sense of like, I can't actually do this. I don't want to betray a friend, so I'm not going to do that. So I felt it was interesting that like there's such a difference in kind of how it reads to me versus how it's acted by Patrick Stewart.
I pretty much exactly agree with that. Like that was how I would have said it too. Like it feels much more. I've logically considered the options in the book, and definitely is convincing enough in the play or the movie to not be that way.
And I almost wonder if it's just because whenever I read things in a very neutral, like when I read things in my mind, it's a very neutral thing. Like I don't like try to give them emotion in my mind when I read.
Yeah, I wondered that a lot doing this episode because I was like, there's not a lot of prose and things that direct your emotions one way or the other. You just get the the dialogue. Obviously, it's a play, so part of it I was like, is this really the movie I'm watching, or is this just because the people acting had to stop and actually think what was going on when this was said, which any play would do, and probably might come to the same conclusion, whereas I never bothered to do that while I was reading. Okay, so Banquo. Only thing I noted anyway, is that he immediately becomes a ghost and like walks towards the camera.
Did you guys ever have, in your class, ever have a discussion about whether or not the ghost was real or not, or if it was just Macbeth going crazy?
I've had that one on Hamlet, where I think it's a lot more possible, but I don't remember talking about it with Macbeth.
Because, like, I don't know. When I read it, I'm not sure whether or not this is him just becoming crazy. Because you have the later spots later on when Lady Macbeth is crazy and is seeing things that aren't there. So, having, like, an actual, like, ghost kind of appear does seem kind of odd for, like, Macbeth.
I have always taken it as definitely 100% just like a delusion of Macbeth, especially since it shows up in a scene with a lot of other characters and he's the only one that sees it. But the movie brings up or changes it to where the witches are there in that scene too, and other people don't see them. So that makes it more complicated.
Well, I wonder if it's
because the witches, as far as I can tell, definitely are real in the plot.
Well, the witches are real, but other than Macbeth, none of them know what they look like. So, like, they could feasibly be there in person, and Macbeth's too self-absorbed to kind of notice them.
But in the play, as it's written, Banquo's ghost is in Macbeth's seat, and all the characters are like, take a seat, and Macbeth is like, there isn't one. The witches are still in the seat in the movie, and the people say, take a seat, and only Macbeth's like, there isn't one. So other characters, at least in the movie, definitely aren't seeing the witches.
Okay.
Like, it seems like just for Macbeth and Banquo.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
Which, I feel like that was one of the minor issues I took with how it was the movie, is that decision to have the witches fill that seat. Because Banquo does still show up a few seconds later, but it just felt like it delayed and stole this moment that should have belonged to the death of Banquo in order to continue this movie's agenda of emphasizing the witches.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, like, I get that, but I still feel like it almost feels like, in this case, the ghost is less real and more kind of an artifact of like the witches doing stuff. Because like I
True. That
think
too.
in this scene, I had to go back and kind of really watch it. I did kind of scroll back a couple times whenever I was first watching it, but they're serving him the food, and it's really only after he starts eating that he starts seeing Banquo. So I don't think that there's a moment where you can
Yeah.
see them messing with the food, but it's entirely within their wheelhouse to mess with the food that way, and that could explain why they're sitting in his chairs because they've served everyone else, but they got to kind of slip something into his kind of meal. What did you think of the dance scene?
Um,
Like they're dancing around the banquet table, and he's trying to like have fun, and after he sees Banquo's ghost, and they're like dancing
yeah, I
with a
remember
mop.
it. I just kind of took it in. I don't remember having a lot of thoughts about it.
I don't really have a lot of thoughts
I
about it either. Like,
It was a moment where I pulled open my play copy and was like, what was happening at this part of the written version? And they do have that line that's like the pledge or whatever. So like obviously something has to happen there, I think.
yeah,
Like it doesn't really naturally flow into the next part of dialogue. So probably when it was performed, there would have been something there.
yeah, and I do know that parts of the appeal of Shakespeare's plays in his time was that it was also like a concert as well.
Yeah, that was part of the non-Shakespearean scenes I mentioned. It's like witches were just big at the time, and they gave the witches a song in all of those extra added scenes. So it was just like that part was added for the mass appeal.
But it's like a demented version of the song from Beetlejuice where they dance around the table.
Yeah, it is. That's like that's a very close comparison now that you bring it up.
Were you satisfied by that kind of interpretation of until the woods, till Burnham Woods comes to Dunsinane? Like
I
when
was
like
because obviously that was my big thought leading up to it was like, how is this fairly like depressing, somewhat grounded, modernish adaptation going to do? The woods came to life because we all picked up a stick. And so the fact that it was like ghillie suits, I did think it was an acceptable answer to that problem. And the one shot they have of it happening, it does kind of look like plants are moving, but it sounds like you did not like it.
well, I mean, I was trying to think about how they were going to do it anyway. Um, I guess the reason they had to do it with ghillie suits is because they were already wearing camo in other scenes, so like they couldn't just do camo. It looked a little silly to me.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I think it'll probably always look silly. I mean, even on stage, I haven't seen this performed, but the best you could do is give every actor like a really big piece of a tree. So, and you can't put that many actors on stage for Macbeth. So, it, it's almost bound to be a little unstageable and silly, it feels like.
Fair enough. I think all that leaves us with is the ending.
Oh, I have several more things, but
Oh,
we can rapid fire them. The slaughter of Macduff's family, I felt like was very obviously. They don't show it, but it just felt very oppressive and visceral.
what I found interesting is that Macbeth is personally involved,
Yeah,
whereas
that
in
too.
in the play he's not. Which
Yeah, that's another thing where I went back and checked. Like, was Macbeth there? Because I don't remember this being so. In the play, as it's written, it's almost a little silly because the son is like, "Mother, I'm being murdered," and then the mom's like, "Murder!" and runs.
yeah, and they removed the "what you egg" line. That's my favorite line in the whole play.
Yeah. So, and obviously, when you read it, you're like, okay, when you stage it, it would come across differently, but it just reads silly.
It's one of those things where it's like it's the lack of props and kind of just the style of acting at the time, kind of that leads to kind of this awkwardness for like modern readers.
Yeah. I don't remember this line from the play, and I don't remember what character it's addressed to in the movie. But Macbeth has a scene where he accuses someone effectively of being a silly goose.
Mm-hmm.
And he like prances around like a goose.
It's an interesting adaptational choice, like, because that whole thing is just like making fun of him for looking scared because he's like white faced or whatever.
Yeah, I just put that it was funny to see Patrick Stewart be like, "You goose," and then like dance around. So I wrote specifically Macbeth was really in his element in that scene.
Yeah.
I forget what happened in the rest of it, but I apparently also liked that. Kind of going back to something I guess we kind of covered at the start, just like modernizing the setting. But I didn't make note of this until later on. Is the setting of this is not just like it would always be masculine because it's about like kings, but this setting in particular is like hyper masculine. Like there's firearms all over the place, and Macbeth is in like a wife beater at one point. I just thought that was interesting.
I don't know, like, because what I see is I see the hallways, kind of these dark, kind of narrow passages, um, almost kind of like yonic imagery, where he's like, walking down the halls or whatever.
So almost like to some degree, other than Lady Macbeth, these hyper masculine characters in this feminine dark hallway space.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I was paying attention enough to note this aspect, but it kind of felt that like whenever Macbeth is trying to do something something bad, he's almost or trying to make a decision, he's almost always in a hallway. It almost feels like the hallway is kind of like small and closed and like restricting him. There's like a claustrophobia of like the space that kind of symbolizes the claustrophobia of like his fate, because it's almost like he's fated to do all these things. Like he doesn't have any real choice in it, because like the witches have prophesized that this is what's going to happen. So like how much choice does he actually have?
Yeah. Okay, so that was my rapid fire going through things other than the ending. So I think we are at the ending. So what did you think of it?
I thought on some level I liked it. On some levels I didn't like it. Like,
what did you not like about it?
I don't know. I just didn't like the fact that like the reason he kind of gave up or whatever was because his gun was out of bullets. Also,
okay,
that like,
I see.
Also that like Macduff got shot in the shoulder and was just fine kind of afterwards. Like, I feel like they could have avoided.
Well, I think that was supposed to show that like he was Macbeth, we assume is like supernaturally able to survive being killed by anyone born of woman. But at the same time, at least in the movie, Macduff, who was born of a C-section, is fated to kill Macbeth. So he also will supernaturally survive Macbeth's attempts on his life.
I did like,
and he doesn't completely give up, because they do have like a knife fight, and Macbeth doesn't just like roll over.
Yeah. Is that before or after he pours the wine on his head?
After.
That part was funny. It almost felt like, and I just now thought of this, it almost felt like a baptism of a kind.
Yeah. I didn't, other than just like, oh, it's a crazy thing to do and I want to make my version interesting, I didn't get what it was going for when I watched it, but that makes sense. The issue I took with it, not that I hated it, is that the murder happens off screen. Like Macduff has him in a hold and they cut. And I just felt like that kind of loses the catharsis of it.
That's how it happens in the play too.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought Macbeth actively gets murdered on stage.
Oh, I guess that's true.
And then his head appears kind of without any explanation as to how that would happen or be staged, but don't worry about it.
I guess that's true. I could have sworn that they just cut away from him dying. Like I felt like he gets stabbed or whatever, but like you don't get to see anything more than him getting stabbed.
But you don't even see him get stabbed, at least not in a way that looks obviously fatal.
Well, this is like an odd part, I thought, was like the witches' involvement. Well, they're like actively involved, or almost like they're like observers, where they're not in the play. where like it almost feels like, I think the way it's shot in the film version is that Macbeth has the upper hand. He's like on top of Macduff.
Yeah.
But then the witches kind of like leave him, and then he's like, okay, I'm done. And then it kind of cuts to black, and then you kind of see him die. Or you don't see him die, but it's implied he dies.
Right. So do you feel positively or negatively about that?
I feel like, again, it kind of puts more focus on the witches, which depends on how you feel about the witches being like a more prominent role.
So I feel like we've mentioned that they're more prominent a lot, but how do we feel about it now that we're at the end of the play?
I feel like it takes some of the agency away from the people in the story, where like that's kind of where I'm at. Is it removes the questions of who's responsible, what is really happening in this, and just says, well, these supernatural forces beyond the character's control were doing it. And like it kind of reads that way in the play, but you also kind of get a little bit of like maybe Macbeth could have chosen differently. But here it feels like, this is set in stone. You think Patrick Stewart got to keep his head?
If I were Patrick Stewart and I was keeping one prop, that's definitely the one I would keep.
I would mount it on my wall.
I did see when I was looking this up to like find it on streaming, it's this article about the superstition about saying Macbeth and having to call this Scottish play in theater, where Patrick Stewart was like, if you've played him, you can say it.
Oh, so now he just goes to theater from theater to like say Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny because he obviously, I guess, is annoyed by it. So he was just like, I'm allowed to say it.
Well, like what's funny is that like, and I had to do more research, but like Macbeth is not even like the most cursed production. Like there are several other productions that like have historically had more issues with them.
Yeah, but I guess they just don't have a matching superstition that's easy and memeable.
But
are we ready to rate the movie?
Yes. How are we doing this again? This is we're doing.
So it's first we decide what video game is this adapting. Easiest to adapt would be a Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a Yoshi. Then there's a Mario. And then there's a Donkey Kong. So like the easiest thing in the world to put on film would be a Yoshi or a Kirby, I mean.
Well, in that case, I would say that this to me feels like a fairly Yoshi kind of performance, kind of production, adaptation.
That's where I was at because it's literally a play script. Like there's very few things that are going to be easier to turn into a play or a movie than a script. But it is Shakespeare. It's hard to deliver the lines convincingly if you're not good, if you don't understand them, if you're not a great actor. It's also hard to bring anything novel to it unless you have some good ideas. So that bumps the difficulty up to Yoshi rather than Kirby in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, it does depend on where you stand on, is it actually an adaptation if it doesn't keep the language? Or does it rank lower as an adaptation if it doesn't keep the language? But
I think they're just two different things entirely. But in this case, obviously we're looking at one that did. So where are we at on, I think what we were going with was, does it complete the game? Which would be like, in theory, got all the star coins, all the achievements. We think it like added to the experience or added some sort of depth, or it's just the best adaptation we can imagine this work having. Or it could beat the game, which just means we think it was good, not the best possible. Or maybe it didn't finish the game.
I think the acronym they use, or the language they use, is did not beat. So
where are you at with this one?
I'm probably with a beat it kind of adaptation. But this is like one of the issues with Shakespeare in general, is that there are just so many of them that it almost feels impossible to say any one of them is like the definitive version.
Yeah. I think kind of for a similar reason, I was going to say I think this is a complete it because I think the acting was stellar, at least for the two leads, and I didn't have any issues. I didn't notice bad acting on anyone else. I think it did use the fact that it's a movie or at least an acted play to add depth and understanding and its own themes actively. I didn't always agree with those themes. Like, it's not always the choice I would have made, but it was at least always interesting in the choice that was made. So to me, I think, I can't imagine asking for it to have done more than it did, I guess.
I guess I can see that.
So I guess we're at a split decision. Not that it's a very contentious one, but
also not that like we're trying to figure out. We're not that we're trying to reach a consensus.
I'm always interested in like if there's like special features or some other short thing I can watch to give a little more depth to my understanding of what we're focusing on this week. So this time I rewatched the Macbeth themed episode of The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron.
There's a Macbeth themed episode of The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron.
Yeah, the theater director, or maybe the principal, they might be the same person, is doing a stage adaptation called Macbeth in Space that he has written. And Jimmy Neutron wants to be the lead because he knows there's a kissing scene with Lady Macbeth.
Okay, we have to do A Midsummer Night's Dream so I can talk about the Zack and Cody episode.
We'll just have to do like Shakespeare in sitcoms or something at some point.
What is it with Shakespeare and sitcoms? I guess it's because it's like an easy way of getting like a forced romance scene.
True, that is always like the justification for it. There were a lot of Shakespeare semi-quotes, like parodied quotes in that episode of Jimmy Neutron, but very few of them were lifted from Macbeth. They were just kind of every famous Shakespeare quote.
Yeah. I think it's been a long time since I've seen the Zack and Cody episode, and I'm talking like 5 years, because I watched it 5 years ago. But I think it was a lot more Midsummer Night's Dream specific. So.
Yeah. They do have the general plot, sort of, in this Jimmy Neutron episode, but all of the jokes are kind of Shakespeare neutral.
Mm-hmm. Just what I'd expect from an adaptation called Macbeth in Space.
True.
Although there's lots of like graphic novel versions of like Macbeth in like fantasy settings.
I think that about wraps us up for today.
I think so too.
Okay.
So,
if you're following along with us, next episode we will be covering Clue, which of course is a board game, but also the movie will be the 1985 film directed by Jonathan Lynn. So if you want to follow along, we're covering the Clue movie.
Yeah, so this one you're gonna need a partner to play Clue with.
Yeah, it's releasing around Thanksgiving. That's why we went with Clue, because we figured why not cover something you'll play with your family at the holidays. So just bring a copy of Clue to Thanksgiving and you'll be set.
Well, that's all. As always, we'd like to give credit to those that made this podcast possible. Shakespeare, of course. Where would we be without him? And those that worked on this adaptation, particularly Patrick Stewart. Hit me up. Let me know. Always ready to hear that call. And a great big thanks for making the world just a little bit more artful. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Join us next week as again we investigate Clue based off the hit board game Clue.